Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor. I'm curator of archives at Kurimanzutto. This evening, we are honored to have Joey Terrill and Roberto Gil de Montes in conversation on the occasion of Roberto's current exhibition, Reverence in Blue. Joey Terrill is second-generation Los Angeles native, where he continues to live and work. In the 1970s, he studied art at Immaculate Heart College. His 4-decade career joined zine making, performance, painting, and a body of work that explores the intersection of Chicano and queer culture and identity. Joey combines personal photographs, found popular cultural imagery, and reproductions of artworks by queer predecessors to conjure utopian landscapes that capture intimacies between friends and lovers and scenes of daily life in his community. In his early work, references to Mexican retablos, pop art, photonovelas, and 20th century comics, while his later work, more technical paintings, trace contemporaneous developments in photorealism and conceptual art. Since testing positive for HIV in 1989, Joey has directly addressed his status as a queer Chicano, both in his art and his professional work as an HIV advocate. His work is currently on view in the exhibition Copy Machine Manifestos, Artists Who Make Zines at the Brooklyn Museum, and in the permanent collection display at MoMA. Roberto Gil de Montes was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and relocated to East Los Angeles at the age of 15. In Los Angeles, he studied at Otis Art Institute. Like Joey, he actively participated in the Chicano art movement in the 1970s and 80s, and also co-founded the experimental art space Lace. In the 1970s and the 2 years Roberto lived in Mexico City in the 1980s, his artistic practice centered on experimental photography. When he moved back to Los Angeles, he began showing with John Baum Gallery and returned to painting, creating figurative scenes of fragmented narratives that reflect his shifting environments and cultural and sexual identity as an artist connected to both Mexico and the United States. For the past 2 decades, he has lived and worked in La Bonita, a small fishing town on the Pacific coast of Nayarit, Mexico. Joey and Roberto have participated in several exhibitions together, including the last Chicano art show at Galleria Santa Ana in California in 1981, and more recently in the traveling exhibition Access Mundo, Queer Networks in Chicano, LA, organized by One Archives at the USC Libraries and MoCA, LA. We are thrilled to have both of them with us tonight, and without further ado, I'll let them take it away.
You start.
Me start? I was going to say age before beauty, but okay. No, hello, everyone. I have to tell you, if it's a pleasure for them to have us here, it's double the pleasure for us to be here on a variety of levels, first of all. And I'll just state from the start here that it was mentioned that, tested positive for HIV in 1989. Never thought I would live this long. So I'm very, very grateful that I'm here and able to share this moment with all of you. But I'll make one distinction here that I think Roberto can follow up on, is that there is a slight age difference between us. When there's a 5-year age difference, when you're 18 years old and someone is, already in college and you're following their art and they're represented by, an official gallery, I mean, you look up to them, and I always admired Roberto as someone that I looked up to as a leader in the local Chicano art community in Los Angeles, and always wanted to, emulate on some level. But I was also fortunate that we had a friendship. We were part of the same kind of art circles and shared, different friends on a variety of levels of intimacy. So I am the student or younger admirer of this gentleman here. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Joey. I want to remember when we met. I really
late
saw a
70s.
photograph where
Yeah.
we're together, and I think it's here.
Yeah.
I have my eyes closed, and I tried this morning. I was looking at it, and I was trying to think, where was I? And so we both participated in the Chicano movement, and I was telling Joy right now, I said, maybe people don't know what the Chicano movement was. So maybe I'll have a show of hands to see if people know what the Chicano art movement was. See?
Okay. Well, a few. So, I mean, if I can just...
Yeah.
So, by the mid-'60s, there was, Cesar Chavez and La Huelga, the effort for the farm workers to unionize because of the abysmal treatment they were receiving, et cetera, et cetera. And there was an advocacy that came out of that that included students, young students in high schools, because of the way that Mexicans and Chicanos were treated or marginalized within the educational systems in LA, which led to, in 1968, the student walkouts. Okay, at that point, I was still in 8th grade, but I was like, wow, I wish I could be in high school to walk out of high school, right? But, and the reason for that, and it's hard, I think it's hard for people to realize that, and Roberto can tell me if I'm wrong, but in the high schools at that time, if you were a Chicana or Chicano, the teachers would say, okay, you need to take home ec because you're going to be working in people's homes. You need to study mechanics because you're going to be fixing people's cars. There was no even mention of pursuing higher education, nothing regarding law, mathematics, science, etc. And that was part of the push, the reason for that. And it coincided with La Huelga and the farm workers. So that became known as the Chicano movement, and there was art that was always a part of that, visually.
Yeah, it was a political movement.
Yes.
And a cultural movement.
Absolutely.
And it was also a very macho attitude movement.
Yes.
So it was, we wanted to participate. You're saying you were in elementary school. I did walk out.
Yeah.
But I actually thought about walking out because I felt good about being in school. Because when I was in Mexico, I didn't have the opportunity to study art, and I already knew that I wanted to study art. So when I got to LA and I was in middle school, I did take those classes. I took all of them. I took auto mechanics, I took electrical, I took wood shop, and technical drawing. I think I might have failed all of them. That was not that was not what I was intended to do, and I had no interest in it. But I began to see that why is it that they're having me in these classes? Aren't there any other classes that I could take? So when I went to high school, a couple of years later, I immediately saw that they have art classes. So I started taking art classes. I took every art classes I could take, and I had some very good teachers that, there was one of them in special, Mr. Mace, who was in ceramics, who would take time to take us on Tuesday nights to the gallery walk in LA, which was at that time all the galleries in La Cienega Boulevard. He would take time to take some of the students, and of course I was one of them going. And I got to see Andy Warhol, I got to see local artists, Ed Ruscha, Charles Garbedian, many artists from LA and from other places. And so I had the idea that I wanted to do art, but that wasn't just enough. I think what really did it is that in my painting class, I had 2 or 3 friends that were all very serious about art, and one of them had a car. So we would venture out to go see films. We would see all of Federico Fellini, and we were very into finding who were the artists and stuff like that. So I was at that point where the walkouts start. And I didn't realize until I did walk out that that's why I was walking out. I wasn't just walking out because we were being put into classes, like you say, to be in the service of the service sector of society, but also because I felt that it was the right thing to do, and I had these friends, like I said, that were very advanced. I still didn't speak English well enough, but I spoke art, and so did they. So that was really my life in school when I first met these gay artists that my world opened. And I think it opened in such a way that I just never let go. I just practiced my art. And I think you know one of them. One of them was Fernando, who was a designer. And he was pretty crazy. But it was like that. A wonderful experience and coming of age. I knew I was gay from a very young age. And I was lucky to have the parents that I had, because they couldn't figure out why I was weird. They thought I was weird because I was an artist, not because I was gay. But at one point, it became evident to my father that I was gay, and I invited some friends to my birthday party at their house, and at the end of the party, my father wanted to talk to me and asked me if I'd noticed that my friends were gay. And I said, I never asked them, really. And he goes, well, don't tell me the little black guy isn't gay. And I was like, I don't know. I really don't know. We don't talk about those things. And we didn't. We talked about art and everything else. And my friend Alvin wanted to be a writer. So when he was asking me this question, I asked him, well, are you going to select my friends, or do I get to select my friends? And he just, for a minute, looked at me and he said, no, you get to select your friends. And that was that. So I was engaged in an art school. There was the best school at the time was Chouinard Art School, and I really wanted to go to that school. My friend from high school was already in there, so when I got out of high school, I couldn't go there because it had closed to. They were going to turn it into CalArts. And so the second best art school was Ores Art Institute, and I prepared myself to go there. That's where I got my education in art. And immediately after I graduated, I did my master's degree, and immediately after I graduated, it was summer, and I started looking for a job. And you know, I don't know if I have anybody here. I see everybody is really young here, but I would look at the want ads and the newspaper, and there was nothing. I couldn't find myself in there. All the job descriptions and what they wanted, none of them were me. And so that really worried me, but luckily I found somebody that was looking for a photography teacher for a youth project, summer youth project. And I got that job, and that man that hired me to be in this project also had an idea. After the project said, Robert, there's money in the city for other projects. Like, what, you know, we could do another project. And I said, let's open an alternative art space in downtown LA. I mean, it's all run down. There's a lot of open spaces. I'm sure we could do it. He worked with the city, so we were able to get 5,000 square feet. I mean, that's like, I think this is around there. How many square feet are here, Jose? 6,000. So we had a space like this, and it was. So I called my friends from art school, and there was 11 of us running an alternative art space, and it's still there after all these years. Still doing this project that we started, and I'm really, really proud of that. So, but yeah, I thought like. I had started doing that at Otis when I was in school. I think if you look at the archive, there's a flyer for my first show. I went to the director of the school and I said, the library just moved and there's an empty space. we should turn that into the art student gallery. And he said, oh no, we already have a gallery, and he gave me the spiel. And, but he let me have a show, and after I had the show, it turned into a gallery for students. So I was very involved and as a student, and later on at LACE. And when I was at LACE, there was a curator, director from a magazine from the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico City, and I went to an event like this, and she was talking about groups of artists in different places, but she was talking about the artists in Latin America, and I was very interested always in Latin America, so I raised my hand and asked questions, and then she said, could you wait until after this is over? And so I waited, and we went to have a drink, and then she asked me, why did you come to Mexico City and work there, and we'll be doing research, and maybe that research will turn into a Chicano show at the museum. So I moved to Mexico City with my partner, Eddie, and we lived there for almost 2 years working on this project that I thought it was important, but it took me away from what I was doing at LACE. But I continued to do my photography. I was very interested in photography. I had moved away from painting because at the end of, for my graduate school years, my teachers were asking the students to do other kinds of art. This is a school where you make art, and you should try doing performance. You should try to do. You're a painter, like minimal painting, minimal art, whatever. So I tried all those things, and when I finished school, I was lost. I just went kind of scrambling doing photography, and I did experimental photo. And so when I got back to Mexico City, I had this friend who was older than me, like we are. Not much older, but we went to school together, and he said, "Oh, Robert, what are you doing photography? You're a painter. You should get back to your painting." And he became sort of my mentor. He helped me a lot in different ways to do my practice, and he was already in a gallery, and he supported me in a lot of my work, and I was able to, in a short time, it's like 3 years, to get a gallery, and the gallery was Jan Baum, and I stayed with her 25 years. And go ahead.
I just want to interject here that person that you're talking about was Carlos Almaraz.
Right.
Okay, and Carlos Almaraz, I was already, I looked up to Carlos because he became the iconic Chicano artist that worked with La Huelga and the farm workers and the Great Boycott, and was doing murals and doing agitprop, and I was so enamored of that. And then here's my other friend Roberto, who's now represented by a gallery, and so again, both of these gentlemen were someone that I looked up to. And when you talk about LACE, which stood for Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, which still exists, that he co-founded, I was one of those artists in that first show that participated, and I got to meet all these other. And at that time, in the last century, right? Pre-internet, phones, etc. We had to engage with one another and visit one another and talk and go out to eat and have coffee and get drunk, and so it was this kind of swirling network. I was a student volunteer with La Huelga and the Great Boycott and Lettuce Boycott, and again looking up to Carlos, but I recognized that there was a lot of homophobia, machismo within the La Huelga and all of the advocacy. So I was marginalized, and in fact told by certain individuals that would teach about Chicano history that there is no room, the focus is on la familia, the family, and there is no room for lesbians and gays like yourself.
Yeah, that didn't stop us from doing.
And actually, it didn't just not stop me. It then motivated me to like, really, okay?
Yes.
I was like, I'll show you. And then me and Teddy and Jack and Rob, we continued to do this work that was sort of pushing the boundaries of what might be considered Chicano art, right? Am I? Yeah.
And, there was something that it comes to mind. Carlos Almaraz was very political. He had traveled to Cuba, he had gone to China, and he had started a Chicano magazine, and which I worked on it with him. But at one point, this is a story he told me, he went to the municipal art gallery, which is a small museum in LA, and he knew the director, and he went up there and he had a bunch of drawings that he knew there was a meeting of a group of women there. And after he showed his work and he sold the work, the director, who was Yosine Yanko Steros, I remember her name, he said that when he introduced him, she said, "Oh, this is Carlos Almaraz. He no longer does art. He's become an activist." And he told me, when I heard that, I just realized that I had given up really doing my painting seriously, and I was more into organizing. So he stopped and went back into the studio, and that's where I got more involved being with him and helping him in the studio. So I learned a lot about my practice through this friend. And there's a show here at Ortus Art Projects with some of his work and his wife's work. And slowly he's coming back again into the picture. And I think it's good. He hasn't had a major, well, he did have a major show at the LA County Museum.
Yeah,
but he lived here in New York, and I hope that there's more interest in his work, and then we get to see more of it.
Well, and again, for those that are unfamiliar with Carlos Almaraz, he was this iconic figure in the Chicano art movement, revered by all these people. What most of those people didn't know is that he was tortured and troubled about his sexuality or bisexuality or whatever, and he would, abuse alcohol, with all due respect, and he had a lot of turmoil, and that was reflected in his paintings, in his art, which are currently on exhibit at Ortus Art Projects in Tribeca. But the focus of the show in Tribeca is about his last 8 years when he had the desire to have a family and a child. And he was successful in doing that because he then proposed and married his friend Elsa Flores, who we both...
Was my friend.
Was your friend as well.
Yeah.
And they ended up having a child, Maya, but that last 8 years where they shared a studio was also a time of a lot of turmoil. Elsa's father died, and then Carlos was diagnosed with AIDS. He died in 1989. And when he died, it shook the Chicano art world that, oh my gosh, here's that disease that everyone talks about, and Carlos is now dead. So on the one hand, this is the way that I look at this, and I think it's important as a personal perspective. I compare the work of Carlos Almaraz and Elsa over in Ortus Art Projects, where you can see all of this expressionistic angst and anger and built-up surfaces and a really aggressive painting style that is beautiful. And then, for me, I come here to this beautiful show, to see Roberto's work, and I see calmness and serenity and peace and beauty. And to me, I can't help but think it's a reflection of his 40-year relationship with Eddie Dominguez.
48.
Oh, I'm sorry. 48, excuse me. Wow, yes. Congrats.
And we would,
yes. Yeah.
And Carlos was very supportive of Eddie and I.
Yeah.
He really, we loved him and he loved us. And I think there was something there. I remember talking to him about sexuality and all this, and he just said, "You know what? I already done that, and I just can't live with a man." That's what he said. I don't see myself living with, I tried it, but no, I can't live with a man. And so, yeah, I don't think, even though he found happiness having a daughter and all that, I think, like you say, he was in turmoil.
He was still in turmoil.
Yeah.
And Elsa had told me that it was, his desire to have a family and a child was always there, but he hadn't acted upon it. And then with the death of John Lennon, which impacted him greatly, as it did me, he, I think, had said to himself, what am I waiting for? The death of John Lennon impacted him and made him think that, life can change like that. So that's when he pushed forward with, I think, proposing to Elsa.
And he also became he withdrew away from the community. He got a lot of people angry at him because he, like you say, he was like the head of the Chicano art movement. And well, he felt like he needed to do his work, and when I say totally withdrew from everybody and the community itself. It was important to him, and he did a lot of work. I'm always surprised when I look at his work to say, my God, he did all of that in 10 years? That's amazing.
Very prolific.
But I learned something from him. I learned a lot of things from him. But one of them was, he would say, just make sure when you go in the studio, make sure that everything is all set up. Make sure that you have the setup before you start painting. And also a lot of technical stuff that he would say. And one thing, I don't know if, you guys are all young. We used to have answering machines. And you could hear like, hello, my name is Carlos, or whatever. Please leave your message. And one time I was in the studio because I used to help him, and he said, don't ever answer the phone. Listen to that message. And the message was, oh, Carlos, I was wondering if you could help me move. He said, this person asked me to help him move from their apartment. And the other message was, oh, Carlos, I'm downstairs. I thought I could come up and visit with you. So he said, they all want something. You gotta when you're in the studio, you gotta just shut everybody up. Don't open the door, don't talk to anybody.
And I think also, and from what you've told me too, and I sort of knew this, that there was an alternate layer of accusations by the other artists in the struggling Chicano community that Carlos had sold out because now he was famous. And when I would hear things like that, I thought, yeah, hello. I wanted to be the next Chicano, Andy Warhol. Okay, but once I recognized that that's not going to happen, I knew I had to go in my own path, etc. So, but over the years, I can't, and I know I sound a little silly here, but I admire Roberto and Eddie so much on so many levels, and I was able to spend time with them in La Penita, where he has his studio and homes, and what a beautiful, beautiful fishing village, in Mexico, and I'm actually going to go again next year.
Pretty good.
Yeah. But again, such a contrast in terms of my art practice, which wasn't about a serene, long-term relationship. I was back and forth with this boyfriend and that boyfriend and dysfunctional, to the nth degree. And I documented all of that. I took the feminist mantra that was prevalent in the 70s when I was at Immaculate Heart about the personal is political, but I also was very aware of and loved the work of Frida Kahlo. And I thought, if the personal is political, who has been more personal or political than Frida Kahlo? The way she has painted her birth, she's painted her romances, her heartbreak, her pain, her physical pain, and I didn't want to paint like her. I wanted to paint in a confessional aspect, the way that she did. And so I would put out there my breakups, etc., with my lovers, as well as some of the romance as well, at a time when nobody wanted to see that. You know, it was.
No, we all wanted to see it.
What?
We all wanted to see
Oh,
it.
you guys wanted to. No, I remember the contrast between like gallerists, like, oh, we like your work, but we're not sure how it fits into our curatorial programming. I said, okay. But, you know, then Roberto and other artists would come in, oh my God, we love your work. I'd say, okay, well, so,
Yeah,
yeah, big contrast.
true.
Yeah.
I think getting back to the Chicano art movement, and I was living in Mexico City when Joey and another artist, Teddy Sandoval, called me and said, you gotta come to LA. We're gonna do the last Chicano art show. And I thought it was a great idea, so I got my work, my photographs, and I came to LA to do the show. And I think what we were thinking, I don't know, you have to elaborate on that. We were thinking that, yeah, I thought, we're being ghettoized here. We're artists, just like any other artists. We don't have to just be in the community, you know. We weren't being invited to show anywhere.
Right.
And so when the Access Mundo show exhibition took place, I couldn't believe that all the things that we did where nobody paid attention, two curators, went out and researched and looked for everybody and put together a show. And all I could think of was like, well, yes, but a lot of the work was already lost, you know? Most of the work, I think, there was a lot.
Well, there was a different approach. The way that I understand it from the curators was that they had to take a different approach to how they researched the work. Where if there were established artists, they could go to their archives. They could go to, you know, the schools, the institutes where they had, you know, information. Here, they had to talk to a person who would then say, oh, here, I have some things here in a shoebox in the garage. And then, by the way, talk to so-and-so. So it was a different approach to doing the research, and as well as understanding that a lot of these artists had died from AIDS. So
right.
There was that additional layer of stigma, and, you know, a move for some art was destroyed by angry family members when artists had died, right? I mean, and it was due to homophobia, AIDS phobia, etc. So it really took a different approach to how to deal with that.
Or their parents, when they died, they just got rid of it.
Or the parent, yeah, their parents or family would throw it out. And there were times when, again, for those that don't know, that back in the day, you know, the family member had more legal rights or authority to the artist than their long-term companion or lover or partner. They could come in and just...
I don't see John this year. He came. This is another great Chicano artist. And he came to support me in this show. And I think yesterday we were out eating and he said, my mother threw all my work away.
But why did she throw?
Oh, he threw the work away. He didn't bother. It's like, I guess when he lived with his family, he had artwork that it was there in their house. He didn't get it. So he said when they died, he realized they had thrown it away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, I mean, a lot of that happened in our lives.
I'll just do another footnote here that, you know, when we, you know, had reached out to Roberto about participating in the last Chicano art show in 1981, you know, in Santa Ana, to come in from Mexico. The work that I exhibited at that time was my 3 paintings that made up the Chicanos Invade New York series, which I did when I had moved to New York in 1980 and 81. And it's those works that are now part of the permanent collection at MoMA.
Right.
Yeah. So to me, it's like the universe has sort of, you know, come full circle for us.
Let's hope not. Let's hope it doesn't go full circle.
But in ways that I had never anticipated.
Taylor.
So I wanted to know, Roberto, if you could mention and talk about how your practice has shifted since being in La Penita and being back in Mexico, as opposed to, you know, when you were in LA for all those years, in San Francisco as well, and maybe what that meant for not just the iconography in your painting, but kind of the subject matters that you were dealing with?
Well, first of all, when we arrived in La Piñita, which Eddie and I didn't know anything about, except that our friend told us that we would like it. Said, this place you would love. And Eddie and I were like, okay, well, let's go check it out. One time that we flew into Puerto Vallarta, so we went out there, and we stayed overnight, and when we left, we said, we got to come back here. This is great. So I rented a place the next year and, to work there, and I think that's when I first started doing imagery that came from being in that place. But I was doing frescoes. I don't know why, like what crazy idea I thought that I could do frescoes, but I did. And I did these small frescoes while I was there. And I went back to LA to continue doing my work and showing a jam bomb. And so the changes didn't come like from one day to another. You know, I would go out there and spend for 5 days. We didn't live there. We finally got a house, but we still couldn't live there. And when both Eddie and I went there after Eddie didn't have his job at Telemundo, we didn't realize that we were going to live there. It was never our plan to leave LA and move to La Piñita. It just sort of happened. And I think my main interest at the beginning when I got there was the fishermen, because there were a lot of them. There were a lot of fishermen every day in the morning in front of the town bringing in fish. And now there's very few. There's hardly anybody anymore. It's like either the fish already are disappearing, or there's fisheries fishing out there. And so at the very beginning, I was not interested just in the fishermen of my place, but I was thinking, wow, what's happening in the rest of the world? Like, what's happening in the Pacific Rim with fishermen? But my work comes from my everyday life. So if something happens one day that I hadn't planned it would happen, like life takes place, a piece of artwork emerges, an idea emerges. And one of them is, there's two paintings on that wall over there with two figures that have lace all over in the front. And that came just recently when I was, Eddie wanted me to see this documentary, and I said, the documentary was called El Dorado. And I said, okay, well, I'll see the documentary. I'll recommend it to everybody here. And so I was watching the documentary, and it was Berlin in the 20s and the gay movement, the gay life in the 20s. And as I watched it, a lot of emotions and a lot of memories surfaced. And at the end of it, I told Eddie, I said, we're being threatened. If that was life in the 20s in Berlin, and we're seeing a change now, that means that we're in danger here. And the next day, I started thinking about that. And the memory came when I was 15 years old and I arrived in middle school. In my homeroom, there was a young guy, his name was Jay, and he was very effeminate. And he would walk around the classroom, and everybody would make fun of him and pick on him and just bully him. And the teacher wouldn't say anything. He would just say, quiet. But I realized that even though people were bullying him and being mean to him, that he managed to go through. But I thought about myself with this movie, and I thought, in it there was a trans woman being interviewed, and she said, that she felt that gay people didn't support the trans movement. And I felt really offended. And I said, why? Why would she say that? I support the trans people. And I went to my studio and I started still thinking about that. And then I thought of Jay, and I thought how Jay, several years later at a party, came up to me and say, "You're Roberto, right?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "No." And she said, "We went to school together." I said, "What class?" And she said, "Homeroom." And I said, "It was only boys." And he said, "Yeah, I'm Jay." And my name is Anna. And I went, wow, amazing. And I saw this beautiful woman, happy. And I was with my mom. And so this memory came back. And I started thinking that maybe when I didn't understand her when I was 15, I didn't understand what was going on. And I didn't realize that I did think about this. I said, well, I'm gay, but I don't want to be a woman. So I was confused, and I was beginning to see this. And not only that, then I thought of my other friend from the same school, but a little bit later. And his name was Manuel, and he had gone to Morocco and get an operation. And he came back, and his name was Sylvia. And in this documentary, they talk about trans people and how they are, how they're rejected by society and they can't get jobs, they're discriminated. And I thought about this friend that the last time I saw her, I said, are we gonna go to the disco? And she said, no, I have to go make rent money. And I didn't understand that, I didn't understand what she meant. But looking at the documentary, I understood what she meant. That trans people, they get so pushed around, can't find a job, and then prostituting themselves. So that like really hit me. And I said, I'm gonna do 2 paintings about these 2 people. And so I did the painting. So my work, it all depends what's going on in my life, and I might pick some memory or I might do something else. I'll get the question now.
Thank you both so much for coming today and sharing your kind and generous words. If you feel comfortable, I would love to hear a little bit more about the impact of HIV and AIDS on you and your practice.
Well, this is my first experience, which also prompted my work, was, and Joey knows the person. A friend of mine said, we had to go see Craig, he's in the hospital. And we all said, well, sure, let's all go. And we went to the hospital, and we were met at the hospital with some people that said, your friend is very sick. We don't know what's wrong with him. But yeah, sure, you can see him. So they took us into a room, and they gave us these bodysuits. It was boots and a bodysuit and cover with just our eyes open so we could see him. So we walked into the room, and I think we scared him when we walked in. And that already started me thinking, like, well, like, what could it be? So he died, and that experience got me into thinking that it was very sad that we couldn't touch him.
I know it's difficult, but yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'll give you a moment, but we had some similar experiences at the time where we had mutual friends that were starting to get sick. I think I was much more involved or knowledgeable about what was happening with HIV, and in my own journey, and I don't mean to make this about myself, but I'll just state that it was when I moved to New York in 1980 that I was infected with HIV. And back then there was no, I mean, it didn't exist. But I remember waking up one morning and being covered, and I mean covered in hives. Just, I looked like a monster, and I was so freaked out. I had no idea, what is this? I was 24 years old. You know, and I didn't have medical insurance or doctors. And I used to work at Conran's, if people remember the old Conran's store in Midtown, and I had to call in sick, and my supervisor, who didn't like me anyway, she was like, oh, hives, yeah, sure, okay, sure. I said, no, really, I'm covered in hives. And I went to a doctor, didn't know what it was, but within a day or two, it went away. Just as mysteriously, it disappeared. And so I went into work the following day, and she said, oh, I guess it went away. I said, well, yeah, it did. And again, she didn't believe me, but as I was folding the rugs there, I could feel my arm getting hot. And I looked, and I could see the hives coming back. So I went to Ava, was her name. I said, Ava, look. And she said, oh, my God, get out of here. Go home. Get away. I had broke out on my face as well, and she saw that. So I never got tested for HIV for many years because I don't know, for people that don't know the history, there was no cure. I couldn't see any reason for it because psychologically it was a death sentence. It wasn't until '89 things changed when, if you got tested, the medical community felt you could start on certain medications that would delay the onset of AIDS. And I thought, well, that makes sense. So let me get tested. It's '89. And I thought, you know, I'm probably going to test negative.
Yeah, I was going to continue with that.
Oh.
So I did this painting that's at the Smithsonian, where I have a young man, and there's a screen in front of him. And I felt that that's how I felt. I felt there was this impediment to touch somebody. And as time has said that, recently we had the COVID epidemic, I really thought this is gonna kill everybody. I really thought it would be catastrophic. I'm not very positive. I thought like this is gonna do everybody. And I was in this little town, but the same thing came back again. The idea that you cannot touch somebody. That I still feel it now, that when I try to kiss somebody in my town, everybody they act like lizards, you know, like they turn away. And so, you know, as humans, we need to have that contact with people. We need to be affectionate. So that was that.
Well,
so if you have any questions about my work, I can do it now.
Thank you for saying all these powerful things about your work and your experience. I wanted to ask about the motifs of the deers in your work. What does that mean?
The what?
The deers. Like you have like a lot of images of like deers.
Yeah, and you know what? I realized that I've actually used it many times. But to me, the idea is, and the deer appears in many cultures. And the idea for me was that the deer is like a figure or a soul that takes you into the afterworld, into the underworld. And I come into contact in La Piñita with the Huichol culture. And I just recently did a portrait of a friend of mine that's a Huichol. And I asked him to come to the studio. I said, I want to do a portrait. And he came in for me to do the portrait. And he was totally dressed. And I don't know if people know the Huichol culture. And I had a beautiful, impeccable white costume. Well, his dress. And he had a blue deer on his chest. And so we talked a little bit about it, and I wanted to do it, but I placed the deer in the context of what I'm doing with my work. And I worked a lot with Lucy Foster. I don't know if Lucy's here, but worked in doing projects in the cemetery in our town, which is right in front of the ocean. And it was devastated by a hurricane that took a lot of the graves onto the ocean. And it's an incredible sight to see this destruction. And I'm really attracted to it in many levels. And I decided to do the deer in the cemetery when I got interviewed for the New York Times, because the photographer that came to take my picture, I asked him, you're going to take my picture for the New York Times? I said, let's do it in my studio. And he said, no, the writer wants the photo in the cemetery. So I was working on this idea, and I thought, well, I'm going to finish it, even though I felt I'm not going to finish it on time. But I was able to do it. But the deer has many different meanings and different cultures, and I've used it many times. In one painting, there's only heads of deers, like floating in the sky. And when people say I'm a surrealist, I was thinking that I wasn't. But then I remember the deer heads in the sky. And I said, oh, well, maybe I am. Any more questions before you get to break? I'm going to be here, so I'm sure there's something to drink here. And if you have more questions, you can come up to me or to Joey, and we'll talk. Yep. Thank you.